All right, welcome to Dead Set Mate, everyone. We're going to be talking about housing policy again. This is a second part to our two-part series. The first video was about 4 real solutions to housing affordability. In that video, we talked about the 4 really important policy goals that the political parties need to address in order to fix housing affordability: reducing the number of investors in the market, fixing public housing, increasing supply in the market, and helping renters. Now, we're going to be looking at the 3 major political parties in Australia in this video: the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, and the Australian Greens. And we'll be looking at their housing policy specifically. So the first one is the Liberal Party of Australia. So what the Liberal Party primarily wants to do is they want to help buyers. They want to provide them with more money, reduce the costs that they have. This is primarily the policy goal that they are attempting with all of their policies. So the first one they talk about in their website is Home Builder. So Home Builder it was a policy that has now expired, but what it was providing $25,000 to anyone who wants to renovate their home or buy a brand new house. All it did was provide an additional $25,000 to people, and this doesn't really solve any issues. This literally just drove house prices higher. This has been a major contributor as to why house prices went up by 20-something% this year. So the second one is the First Home Super Savers Scheme. This is another policy that is a really bad policy. It's about first home buyers being able to put money into their superannuation and fish it out. And basically it just allows them a slight tax advantage. It doesn't really do anything to actually help them save that much. This doesn't actually help with any of the actual major 4 real solutions that we talked about earlier. This is purely a stopgap, and even at that, it's a really poor stopgap. When houses are selling for, upwards of $1 million in Sydney, this policy doesn't help them at all. An additional, being able to save an additional $30,000. What are you living on, right? How much are people earning? How much are young people earning who want to look towards buying a house? This is just not something that is adequate to meet the need. Next, we've got 3 policies that are effectively the same sort of thing: the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme, the New Home Guarantee, and the Family Home Guarantee. They are providing the lender's mortgage insurance to first home buyers who have a very small deposit. What this does is, first of all, provides money to lenders. This is an insurance product that lenders require when they are taking on a risky loan. So what the government is doing with these policies is it's not really helping first home buyers, it's helping the big banks, right? And all that it's doing is it's putting these people, these first home buyers, putting them in a vulnerable position. If there are corrections in the housing market, they could be left in a negative equity situation. When you have such a small amount of equity in your house, 5%, 2%, whatever it is, if housing prices do correct, that will very much hurt those people. And we have seen housing prices being very volatile for the last several years. After 2017, we saw, I think, house prices decline something like 15%. And then this year, we've seen them go up 22%. Next year, we have realistically no idea. If interest rates go up, we could see house prices go down. We could see a whole heap of things, and it's just simply unpredictable. And putting first home buyers who have such tiny amounts of equity, putting them in positions where they could be left with negative equity is really bad policy. Then we have another tax avoidance or tax minimization for retirees or people who are about to retire. Allow them to sell their big home, buy a small home, and save $300,000 with a slightly lower tax rate. This may help some people, but it's a very, very tiny thing. It's not a real solution. This doesn't help solve the housing affordability problem. This is an extreme stopgap measure that literally does nothing. And what it's allowing is it's providing a tax cut to people who can most afford it, who most don't need it. So basically, these are over 60s who already own a home. Presumably, they earn enough, and presumably, they have a huge amount of assets. They have sufficient income. So this is not this isn't really helping anyone. We'll move on from here, but it's very disappointing what the Liberal Party are coming up with. What we talked about doesn't reduce investors, it doesn't fix public housing, it doesn't increase supply, and it doesn't help renters. It is on all of those 4 real solutions. These policies do none of those. Liberal Party right now, I don't know what they'll come up with prior to the election, but the current policies they have in their toolbox, these are really bad policies, and any variation on these policies would also be very bad policies. So primarily, they don't want to solve housing affordability at all. Labor Party, so they have a policy that they have written up. This is in their 2021 platform. So what they've talked about is they will put away $10 billion into a savings account. That's what they're calling this off-budget Housing Australia Future Fund. It's a big savings account that the government uses to invest in a bunch of other things. And basically, the money that is coming back from this savings account, they will use to solve the problem. Basically, they don't want to use real money. What they want to do is they want to show that they're fiscally conservative. They don't spend money. That's their whole thing. They don't want to be branded as big spenders. So that's why they have come up with this policy. They're basically saying that, look, we don't want to spend any money. You can't accuse us of being fiscally irresponsible or whatever else they're scared about. So what they talk about in this policy is that the interest that is coming back from that $10 billion investment will go towards social housing, 20,000. And then those social housing, some of those will be dedicated to children fleeing domestic and family violence, so on and so forth, older women, those kinds of things. And then 10,000 will be available for frontline workers. They also say 25% of Australia's social housing needs urgent repair and maintenance. That's 100,000 homes. That's something. This is, this does help social housing somewhat, but they don't really want to build a sufficient amount. What would meet the need of the nation right now? And they're saying that it would mean an immediate $500 million contribution from the Commonwealth and a partnership with the states, with the expectation they would contribute up to the same amount in new funding. So the expectation is they would give $500 million to the states to fix social housing if the states put up the same amount of money. Now, whenever you put these kinds of caveats, what you're basically doing is, look, the states can't afford to put up that much money, so we're going to fund much less than that. And that's what they're hoping for here. It's quite clear that the Labor Party right now doesn't want to significantly address the housing affordability issue. All of these policies they talk about here are all about, providing the smallest possible target for the upcoming election. They don't really want to propose real solutions. They don't want to spook any of the 11 million investors that we have in Australia, housing investors, and they want to present the smallest target that they can into this election. Like we said, it doesn't really reduce investors. Does it really fix public housing? They want to build a few more public houses. They want to fix a few of the current public housing stock. They want to increase supply really a little bit, tiny amount, and they want to help renters. Well, previously they have had that as a policy, but in this case, it doesn't seem like they're particularly clear on that. Primarily, they might be slightly better for renters than the Liberal Party. They will likely fund tenancy advocacy services and things like that, provide tenancy unions, but primarily they don't come out with it. It doesn't take a pride of position on their policy platform. Next one is the Australian Greens. The Australian Greens have a very elaborate set of policies on dealing with housing. So the first one they talk about is they will establish a federal housing trust. So what they want to do is build 1 million public houses. 1 million public houses is pretty much on the scale of what we would need in order to make sure that people who want housing can get it at a very reasonable price. They want to build 750,000 new public and community houses to slash public housing waiting list. There's massive public housing waiting lists, something like 80 or 90,000 on just New South Wales alone. It's ridiculous. The public housing needs are, massive, and this would go towards fixing that issue, building 125,000 new shared ownership homes, which will allow first home buyers to buy a home where they want to live for $300,000. We'll talk a little bit more about this policy right now. This is a shared equity scheme. It's somewhat similar to the one that's being implemented in Victoria, the Victorian Home Buyer Fund, where the government will provide you with a 25% support when you're going to buy a house. But in the Victorian scheme, what you do is you can actually buy that stake that the government has back from the government. In this scheme, there's no buying back the stake. The government will always own a portion of the home. And so what this would do is it would be an extremely secured renting tenure, right? So you go into this agreement where you will buy effectively a public house, shared ownership house, and you would get it very, very cheap. $300,000. You can pretty much not buy a house for $300,000 in any capital city, in most regional cities, in most regional towns even, I would say. So what this would do is it would provide an extremely, extremely cheap house for people to go into. And then also the mortgage payments that you would be making would be going towards equity that you actually own, right? So, if you stay there for 5 years and you pay off a decent part of your mortgage, you actually get to keep that. So instead of putting dead money towards rent, this would be money that you would be saving that you could go out and you would buy a house with, a house in the private market. So what this would allow is it would allow people to have a home guaranteed. You can always go into a home for $300,000. And then if you want to go out into the private market and buy a different house in a different location or whatever else you want, different amenities, you can actually do that. By increasing supply massively, it would actually make sure that housing affordability is still, houses are still affordable, basically. 125,000 new public universal access rental homes to provide affordable housing. This again would be helping renters. Providing more houses for renters helps renters. It's as simple as that. And then they want to create 135,000 new jobs in construction and services. This would, definitely help Australia's economic recovery. It would, these kinds of jobs are, well paying. They are some of the skills that Australia already has. We have a lot of chippies and we have a lot of people who can build houses, and we need to make sure that they are gainfully employed and they are able to take care of their families. And then there's, they want to give stability to people who rent. They create a national minimum standard for rental homes. That's the tenancy advocacy services. They want to make homes affordable, regulate the amount and frequency of rent rises. That is also a major thing we've talked about. Create a home, not just the house, allow people to rent with their pets, make minor changes, and ensure all homes meet energy efficiency standards and security standards. This is a major problem with rentals right now. If you have pets, it's very difficult to find rentals. Most rentals don't have solar panels. They don't have very high energy efficiency, and most of the time you can't make changes like, put holes in the wall so you can hang stuff, all that kind of stuff. It's very difficult to do those things, and this would go a long way to fix that issue. And then finally, secure rights for everyone who rents. They want to fund tenancy advice services, and that would be, very helpful. This would greatly support people renting right now. And that's not all. There's another page. That's how elaborate the Australian Greens have put towards this housing policy. So they want to guarantee funding, establish a new 10-year funding agreement for service providers. This is for people who are for organizations that are providing help to homeless people. And this would make sure that those charities have a long time tenure. It would make sure that those charities have a much it's not a charity, it's a non-government organization, but this would be hugely helpful to addressing homelessness. It would increase funding for homelessness services. This is a major problem in Australia. We still have so many homeless people despite being literally the wealthiest nation in the world. Support better community services, seek matched funding from the states and territories for community services. Pretty simple. And then fund specialist services, increase investment to specialist homelessness services to $500 million a year under the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement. I don't know much about it, but that sounds really good. Another thing that's not actually here, but one thing that they have mentioned is they will try to get rid of negative gearing and get rid of the capital gains tax discount and any other tax advantages that investors have. So those would also be massively beneficial to reducing the number of investors in the property market. The Australian Greens do actually they want to actually fix this issue much more so than definitely the Liberals and Labor, right? Labor does have some good policies, but they are very much trying to present the smallest possible target that they can. They don't really want to address this issue to the core. Well, that's everything for today. Thanks, guys, for listening. If you haven't seen the first video, we do talk about what the intent of those 4 criteria that we were talking about, the 4 real solutions to housing affordability. Have a look out for that video. It is something that is an absolute fundamental to understanding how we can fix the housing problem. That's all for today, guys. Thanks so much for joining. We'll see you next time.